this morning comes from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven in Jerusalem. And at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native tongue of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all those who are speaking Galileans? And how is it we hear each of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. In our own language we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power." All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others sneered and said, "They are filled with new wine." But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. "Men of Judah and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk as you suppose, for it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show them portents in the heavens above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and smoky mist. The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the coming of the Lord's great and glorious day. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Friends, do I have good news for you today? I have solved the energy crisis. No, there's no need to worry about or argue about drilling or trying to develop new energy resources. It's so simple that I'm amazed no one has suggested it earlier. Here's what I think that we should do. Let's take all the extension cords and power strips that we can find in this church and use them to connect every single electrical device in this church into just one outlet. We can power everything off of one outlet. You know, the lights, the air conditioning, the PA system, everything will only draw 15 amps of power. Think of the savings and energy costs to our church, and as the word spreads and more homes and businesses and the whole nation follows suit, this will solve the energy crisis, right? I'm sensing some hesitation here. No, no, right? No, of course not, unless your goal is to trip breakers and cause fire hazards. Of course, houses simply were not designed with the idea that anyone in their right mind would try to power all their electrical devices off of just one outlet. My house was not designed that way. Your house was not designed that way. And God's house was not designed that way. The good news is this: God's house is supplied with all the outlets it needs to power this church. You. Each and every one of you can be an outlet for the Holy Spirit if you are willing to share its energy with our church. For the Holy Spirit, which is the power of God, is made manifest in the world by your contribution of time and talent to the church. For God did not send the Holy Spirit to just an individual or a small group on Pentecost, but to the whole church. In other words, God did not create a church with only a single outlet to power it, but has equipped the church with as many outlets as there are believers in Jesus Christ. Each one of you has been given unique gifts by the Spirit, but no one person has been given a double share of the Spirit like the prophet Elijah asked from Elijah. Instead, we share equally in its power. Therefore, it makes no more sense to expect the staff, session, or committees to do all the work in a church anymore than you expect to power your home off a few outlets. Such an arrangement would only lead to burnout. Instead, let your light shine. As an individual, each one of us can do the work of an individual, one person. But as a church, we can do great things for God far beyond what you or I can do alone. And our combined work is not simply added together in the church, but is multiplied and grows exponentially. The leadership of our church, the staff, session, and its committees are charged to equip and mobilize you into action, to call on you to offer your outlet, your share of the Spirit, your 110 volts and 15 amps to power the mission of our church and service to Jesus Christ. Therefore, throughout this summer, the session is sponsoring an open house hosted by our committees. You are invited to come and reflect on your service to Jesus Christ. This event is an opportunity to make your time and talent commitments to the church for the upcoming year in order to power our ministry. Also, it is an opportunity to let others know if you need a rest from your responsibilities in order to refresh yourself. In this way, no one person or group is expected to do all the work or to work without needed breaks. Instead, each member of the body works together as a team to honor Christ's commission and has the support to take a sabbatical whenever one is needed. You see, Pentecost is more than a celebration of the beginning of the church. Pentecost is a model on how to be the church. The truth is that we live in a consumer society, and the temptation then is to be a consumer church. That is, a church that caters to people rather than a church that calls people to service. In a consumer society, we pay money for services. Is that the kind of church we seek to be? A consumer church that exists to provide services for money, where members come to be served rather than to serve others? I don't believe that any of us wants to be such a church. Instead, let us be a church that takes its shape from Pentecost, a church that believes that the Holy Spirit empowers each member for ministry, a church that challenges each member to be an outlet of the Holy Spirit that helps power our ministry together. For example, today we are confirming 4 of our youth. And as you 4, the Austin, Dalton, Judd, and Callie, and those who have been confirmed earlier, move out into the world, I challenge you not only to find a church to call home, I challenge you to find a church that does more than offer the services that you want and that you like. Find a church that values what you have to offer, a church that believes you have been given a share in the power of the Holy Spirit, a church that challenges you both to share your gifts and also to help power their ministry to serve others. Let Mount Jefferson Presbyterian Church be just such a church. Again, each one of us is one outlet, 110 volts and 15 amps, no more, no less. If you try to power the ministry of this church alone, or if you expect one person or group in the church to do that, that will only lead to burnout. On the other hand, if you aren't willing to share or to be an outlet that helps power our ministry, if you only come to be served, then our church will never reach its potential and may one day indeed face an energy crisis. But if each of us will be an outlet for the power of God's Spirit and contribute his or her manifestation of the Spirit for the upbuilding of the church, if the staff, session, and committees of this church will not try to do everything themselves, but will seek to equip and mobilize this church into action, then there will never be an energy crisis in this church, and no burnout and no fire, save for the fire of the Holy Spirit that burns within each of us from our youth to our longtime members to power the church of Jesus Christ. Let all God's people say,